It's a convenient stop on the way to success.
That's $5 half.
So no, so don't know. Well, we're
It's time. Oh, someone's actually transcribing our shit.
somebody's what?
I hope that doesn't go anywhere.
It's recorded.
Like that's why you
She
see me
abandoned me.
keep moving the microphone around. It's 'cause I don't know if I'm supposed to wait for Lars.
I don't think they strictly speaking mean.
No. So, all right. So, just for everyone, our relevant AD had to depart the meeting early for personal reasons, and so the AD who was supposed to be helping us today is Lars, but obviously he's not here, so we're gonna go without AD. So, everybody be nice so that I don't have to do anything that I don't want to do. And on that note. Since this is a Friday meeting, I would normally say to the audience, this is the note well. And since you've all been here all week, you've read it a whole bunch or whatever, but I know a bunch of you have not been here all week. It's the same note well, read it, love it, live it, be nice to everyone, be professional in our interactions. Note really well. Yeah, this is.
They changed it to a note really well.
No, we did the note well. Now we're doing the note really well. You should go look on the chair's resources on the slides they recommend for you.
Okay. Okay.
No comment on which of the chairs builds the chair slides. All right, meeting tips. In case you weren't already aware, in the pre-meeting chat that was captured in the automatic closed captioning system, this meeting is being recorded. If you're not okay with that, I don't know what to tell you. Okay, agenda. Why we're here. Open for agenda bash. This is it. If there's a topic you want to put on here that I somehow missed, by all means, feel free to come to the mic, possibly the chat room, raise your hand. Okay, seeing nothing, we'll stick to this agenda. We should have some time, particularly at the end. I will reserve at least 5 minutes, 10 minutes for kind of way forward. I didn't put times on these, but there was one at some point.
Ken, the way forward. Sorry. We'll discuss future interims in that time.
Yeah. Okay, status. So you want to cover these?
Sure. I don't get the all these. All right. So since the last meeting, a little bit rough on the closing of some items, but there were several documents that were put out for either adoption by working group or working group last call. So the Dell State ID 03 document, and I believe this was all reported over the email. The working group last call is complete, and that's going to move forward. Similarly, for the SCSI layout for NVMe, working group last call is complete. And both need Shepherd write-ups, as does the layout weak cache consistency document, working group last call complete. Internationalization document is a work in progress. I think my take on it is we are looking for expert review and guidance on the document to move it forward. This has been a somewhat long-standing item. We've gotten a little bit of feedback that's somewhat helpful, but we need to reinsert it into the queue of asking for help there. Okay. The largest work item is the 5661 BIS draft. That's part of the agenda today. And Dave Novak will be talking about that. And we've adopted Talpy's RDMA document.
Did we get enough votes on the list to say that's adopted?
The RDMA commit is adopted? Or that was the one we had to redo
Yeah.
at this meeting. We had to say,
Right.
okay, and restart it. Okay, so one of the documents we sent out was Tom Talpy's. Is he on? Yes, he is. And Tom, remind me if I'm wrong. There was a bunch of documents sent out for various working group adoption or last call, and for advancement. The one document was Talpy's RDMA commit document for adoption into the working group. We actually didn't get any feedback, if I recall correctly. Tom, please weigh in here if you know something else. I just need to resubmit that and get driving.
I have a little noise in the background, so I'm trying to keep the mic muted. There was a call for objection, if you will, or consensus, and everybody said yes. Nobody said no. If that, I never saw the official announcement that this was adopted, but certainly all the indications point that way. So
Yeah.
this is good. The next step would be for me to republish it as 2 documents, as was discussed at IETF 117. I'll go ahead and do that.
Okay. Hold on, where the chairs are. We can't stop this. What?
I'm just gonna put a poll out of any objections to our RDMA advancing to 2 documents and being adopted.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So Tom Talpy, we will take your direction, and
Yeah, I'm going to do a quick show of hands poll using the tool. The question is, any objections to RDMA advancing and being adopted? So if you object, raise your hand. And if you're no objection, either do not raise your hand. Okay? It's a question and then negative. I'm sorry. I think there's a chair rule that you're not supposed to do this, but I'm doing it.
you achieved your goals.
And that actually pretty much is the entire room responded, and this is adopted, and we'll move it forward, and we'll move it forward in data tracker. Tom, as soon as you tell us the documents to put into the working group are ready.
Great. Yeah, it'll take me a little while. I'm going to have to take the document apart and put it back together into 2. So I should be doing that in the next couple of weeks.
Just some feedback, Tom. Your voice is coming out of the ceiling, and you sound like the voice of God. So.
Whoa.
Thanks, Tom.
And then for folks who were following the list closely, you noticed that I sent out a missing adoption call yesterday. We'll close that in approximately 2 weeks from today. So please respond on list for that.
And Lars Eggert has entered the room.
It's all good, right? So because we got the poll done before he managed to get in here. So okay. Interim meeting. We had an interim meeting. You likely did not attend. I'm going to leave that last question of the can we get you to attend the interim meeting to the way forward conversation at the end. But I will just kind of say, hey, we had a very poorly attended interim meeting at this point. Oh, all right, that's the end of the chair slides. Now I actually need the agenda because I don't memorize these things. All right, so this is actually kind of the security approach conversation, and I wanted to have a little bit of I don't have slides for this, kind of a chair's conversation with the working group. I want to hear feedback about how we want to kind of progress. So there's a agenda item, draft item today about how to secure RDMA. There's the work on 5661 BIS. That really won't progress unless we kind of really do a pretty significant piece of effort on security, right? So, from the time that document was approved to today, the security consideration sections have kind of changed in their needs. And so I want to know, I would like to hear feedback from the group as to what the appetite is and what the scoping folks think might be appropriate to how to approach security. And what it would take, assuming that we keep progressing 5661 BIS. All right, but you guys have to like come and give me feedback for me to get feedback.
Needed. I mean, what implementations are currently hindered by having a BIS document? What adoption is hindered? And not saying the work is bad, but I don't actually see it solving a real problem for the NFS community right now. Oh, and by the way, Christoph Helbig, we're supposed to stay on next.
So, all right, Christoph, thanks for that. I have kind of, I would almost say if I drop down a layer in there, and so I am not an NFS, kind of provider. Don't work for a file systems company. Is there market demand for different authentication mechanisms? Kind of those transport updates to kind of to newer stuff. I mean, from a security point of view, does the market asking for any of that? I mean, to your point, Christoph, if questioning what the value to the market of 5661 BIS is, I would be inclined to think the answer is no. But anybody care to answer? Are vendors seeing that?
Tom Haynes. We always get asked, is it secure, right? But there's Kerberos or there's TLS. Right? And we can satisfy with one of the two. We're not being asked, we're missing these features that are in the BIS document.
Okay. All right. I'm going to give everybody if anybody has any comments, chat, or I don't see anybody in the queue online either. A moment. Otherwise, we'll move on to next topic. Yeah. All right. Internationalization. Dave, I think that's you. Dave, if you're speaking, we're not getting anything. While we're waiting for Dave, I will comment that, Tom, I'm sorry. I did actually update the agenda, but I forgot to update the agenda in the slides. So there's no Talpi RDMA.
I forgive you. Soren is pasting something in the chat that there's something wrong with the mic. Is that? All right, Soren, are you with Dave? Novak? No, Soren cannot speak. There's Soren's video.
Oh, okay. So I love Meet Echo. That was dripping irony or sarcasm. Hey, Soren, my suggestion is to exit and restart from the session. You did it twice already. Third time's the charm, honest to God. On the interim meeting, I had to drop twice and then restart. Okay. Give it one more try. Thank you.
I was hoping for interpretive dance.
Yeah, so Meet Echo's audio has been confounding on for the few people who attended the intro. Dave, are you seeing my chats?
Can you hear me now?
We
Yeah.
can.
Soren! Third time's the charm.
Yeah, third time is a charm. You know, I didn't think that. I thought twice is the charm, but
Seriously, Chris.
okay. So I'm good. I'm here, so I will be able to comment now if I need to. So, but I think that Dave could have the same problem. It's something to do with Massachusetts, I think.
All right. Well, now that we got you connected, Soren, did you actually have a comment or was this a Pyrrhic victory?
No, I was wanting to comment on David Novak, but he didn't start. So I no, I checked to be sure that I can. That was the point. Now I can, so I can. Okay, so go ahead. I don't want to stop you guys. I mean,
Okay, and sorry about that, Soren. We're having
no.
difficulty with Meet Echo.
How would you guess that I have to do it 3 times?
Because I had to do it 3 times. It wasn't a guess. And somebody else had to. It seems to be a feature, actually.
Shall we just move Tom first? And...
Well, we actually kind of covered what Tom's,
No,
which
that
was
all of it.
with
Okay.
the doc and whatever that
Okay.
that's already done. Dave is more or less the rest of the agenda.
So, I mean, if we have some time, I can throw in a tiny little bit.
Dave asked, where is the internationalization review? In chat.
Well, so I'll give the update, which is, and I'm not sure, Lars, if you were updated with Zahed. So I'm supposed to schedule a meeting between um, uh, folks in the art area, myself, Dave, and Zahed next week.
Hi, Lars Eckert, I guess NFS working group participant. I did try to explain to Zahed and also like the rest of the ISG that there's some history here, in the sense that, you know, I think this is the third time where NFS got asked to redo internationalization, and that there's some justified frustration on the part of this working group to hear, you know, a different approach that doesn't work. I hear that Zahed had a phone call with John Glenson, who was the person who sent I guess the non-review, right? Because he said, you know, and there's a way forward. Zahed had to leave urgently. He was here earlier in the week, but he had a family emergency in Sweden, and we all said, you know, get on the plane and go back and don't look back. So I haven't heard anything since, and I didn't expect to. But as far as what I remember you telling me on Monday morning or Sunday, there was an approach that was discussed, and that's all I know.
So yeah, it was that we will kick that off with a meeting that I will schedule between those the parties listed on next week.
Okay.
So you Zahed
and Dave and John.
Okay.
Okay, that's what I know. Thank you.
So, I mean, Christoph Helwig again, NFS working group participant, and with a risk of sounding like a broken record because I stated something pretty similar last time, I really don't think the document in its current form is a document that should even go up to higher level review, because it's mixing up clarifying behavior in existing published specifications. It's trying to be a split out part of the BIS document. And at the same time, it really does not address the root problem in internationalization, which is, and that's a problem that appeared in the original NFS4 spec, that it tries to document internationalization behavior, and in practice, in all relevant implementations, the NFS implementations don't actually do internationalization. And the document is trying to get to that a little bit in a, let's say, rather rambling way, being snarky at previous working group discussions. And I really don't think that helps anyone. I think what really helps, if we want to do it, is do it for new versions only. Don't try to clarify behavior for existing published versions, because it's in there. It might not be correct. And then address this root point that whatever we previously said is not actually true. Internationalization is in general not done by the NFS server or client implementations, but by other layers in the file system stack. And then clearly document what that means for implementations. And that, I think, is both more useful for implementers and more likely to pass IESG review or any other IETF review.
Dave here.
Yes, you can hear. Hey, Dave, this is Brian Beepy. Soren had problems talking to, as I did on the interim meeting, if you recall. You might want to disconnect and try to reconnect on Meet Echo. Meet Echo, I had to do it 3 times. Soren just did it 3 times so that it could be heard, and it worked. You want to try a couple of reconnections? Exit and come back in. We'll wait for you. You seem to be having the same problem I had. I could hear everything, but nobody could hear me speaking, and it wasn't me or my computer. It was Meet Echo screwing up. What was that?
I'm swapping the slides, assuming he actually, does.
He's not disconnected.
So while we're waiting, I'd like to throw in a little like minor item potential announcement. So I've got initial implementer feedback for the NVMe layout document. And the one thing that I heard twice now is that a lot of the software-defined NVMe over Fabrics implementations really like to use the UUID as the unique identifier and not the identifiers we currently define in the existing SCSI layout. And we had a discussion on that, I think, in Philadelphia or sometime in the working group, that we don't want to add this new code point in the NVMe layout because it's just a binding. And if we want to add it, it should be another tiny draft, probably less than a page minus the boilerplate. And given the implementer feedback, I will probably start this, publish a personal draft, and then quickly ask for working group adoption.
Thank you. Sounds reasonable.
Hey, I just have a quick question on the current slide. Were these mailed out earlier? This is news to me, and I got a bunch of input on it.
They are actually on the. Okay, so yes, they were on the meeting materials earlier this week, and then
Oh,
this
like
is
in the past
actually
few days. Okay.
yeah, and then this is the agenda was out. I mean, I was late, but it was out a week and a half ago.
Okay. And this was all right. My fault for not seeing it, I guess. It's fine. I'm very interested in this.
Anyway, the first pass of these slides was uploaded yesterday, the day before, sometime this week, and then this version of the slides was updated this morning.
Great. Maybe my email has been failing me, but I'm looking and there's hardly any messages since early July, and none of them mention this draft. So
What would you like to do, Chris?
This is Richard, if I may. You have to go to the meeting material and then to the second top bar there that says slides, and not the tar file or the download package directly from the schedule. That is empty.
I actually don't know how. I don't know how that actually gets populated or works. So, thank you for that. I've got nothing.
okay, I'll try to find them.
Who's talking to what? Chris.
Yeah, yeah, if we can't get audio from Dave in the next moment or so, then it's pretty much the end of the meeting, unless someone's got some other business.
So bring up these 5, 6. The same as
No, he updated both of these. I mean, they were in my mailbox this morning.
Okay.
So they're up.
I can step through them. I can. if you want me to.
Go for it. All right, we're gonna do an audible, and
Can you hear
Ryan's
me?
gonna.
Yes. How many times?
All
do you
right.
have to Dave, how many
Third
times? do you
time
have
Am
to-
I up, or is it Tom first?
Say it again. Okay, Dave.
Okay, so I'll go ahead. All right, so this was a late edition, but I think it's important to get the discussion started. Wait a minute. Let's see. Wait a minute. Yes.
Sorry, I'm just
All right.
switching back to the RDMA security, Dave.
Right. My understanding was in the agenda was that I was after Tom, but anyway, I can do it now.
Go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, I said this is, as I said before, this is a late edition, but I think it's important to get some momentum here and get started this, because this is something we need. Let's move on to the next slide. This is an overview. I think the most of it, the part I've thought most about, is the motivation. Okay. So before we didn't have TLS. Encryption was supposed to be done by this privacy or variance, and that was per principle encryption, which was hard to offload. And even though our security was worse, we had a further problem with RDMA in that when you turned on privacy, you basically turned off direct data placement. So this really was. Now we're facing a different situation. Now, non-RDMA use of NFS has RPC using TLS, and there's no RDMA equivalent, and I think that's bad. So let's move on to the next slide. I think we need to address this gap somehow, and I've been thinking about that, and some of the slides there are my sort of very vague approach of, but my primary point here is we need to start on this. I don't think we can have RDMA users forced to accept inferior security, particularly since RDMA is the way has been so good about improving, helpful as far as improving performance. So I think we're going to also see, and we've started to see, need for RDMA outside of within machine room environment. So I think we require TLS equivalent security with our equivalent performance, at least, to support RDMA over a distance, including, metro area wide clusters, which are a number of miles in diameter. Okay. Anyway, let's move on to the next slide. So I've been looking at some of the existing. Okay. So one way to do this is to layer TLS on top of TCP, and then on top of that, put in the IWARP stuff. And you need a new negotiation and upgrade mechanisms to go along with the what we currently have for TLS RPC using TLS. But I think I looked at the document. That's probably not doable. There's some buffering issues that make that hard, which are explained in RFC 5042. Anyway, given that, let's move on to the next slide. And this is a promising alternative. They replace TLS TCP by QUIC, which has the security characteristics of TLS or better. And I think given QUIC's frame boundaries, I think you wouldn't need DDP in the stack. So I would also need to investigate the fact that QUIC has multiple streams. I would look at how SCTP, I think I've just started to do that, is done in RFC 5040 and 5043. And I think probably intuition tells me you might try to handle each chunk as a separate stream. So that's sort of better if things are lost. You know, one RDMA operation would continue, but one would wait for, but others could go on. Anyway, possible advantages of that, and given Lars in the room, maybe he can tell me on these whether these are right or wrong. So, possible advantages are use multiple paths rather than one single, one fixed. I think better congestion control than you have, and certainly you have better, unless Lars contradicts me, we have better recovery from lost packets. So I think that's good. Let's move on. Next slide.
Hey, David, Lars, can you leave this up for a second since you asked me for feedback? So yeah,
sure.
I think you can basically think of the layering on top of Quick similar to the layering that's done on top of SCTP, because they're pretty similar at that level. Except that I think Quick has even more streams. So basically you have 2 to the power 62 streams, so you can really just use like a lot of them with not an issue. And I think SCTP had a little bit more of a limit there, if I remember correctly. Maybe it was 2 to the power 32 or something like that. But you know, who knows? So you can basically aggressively use streams without a downside. Multiple paths. So Quick multipath is currently, I don't think it's not done. It's sort of in the experimental phase, and it is a hard problem fundamentally. Once that is added, I guess NFS could figure out how to use it. But at the moment, I would sort of limit yourselves to the regular Quick that's deployed. Congestion control is basically new Reno style, according to RFC 9002, except that most implementations that you might want to pick, because you certainly don't want to implement Quick from scratch, do have alternatives like Cubic or BBR available. And typically they have sort of a pluggable congestion control setup, like the Linux kernel, for example, where you can, for a connection or as a default, pick whatever you want. And you do have better performance because unlike with TCP, with Quick, you don't have head of line blocking, meaning that if you lose one packet, the stream that had data lost might get blocked until that's recovered and can be delivered to the application. But other streams can still be delivered. So auto order data, which is, you know, what NFS uses, can be delivered. So you have potentially better latencies for that. So that's sort of my takeaway. But I think the direction is correct.
Okay, thanks.
So Christoph Helvig, NFS working group participant. So I like to skin the cat from a different direction than this very networking centric approach that Lars did, which I don't even understand. That is, if we're looking at storage protocols, and I consider NFS a storage protocol in respect, the one big thing why people use RDMA is essentially use it as a standardized and efficient way to properly align the actual storage payload. That is, get your data efficiently without copying into page-aligned chunks. And the important bit here really is the hardware offload. I mean, software RDMA implementations are interesting for testing experimentation. They don't actually matter in production workloads. So whatever we're doing here needs to be something vendors are willing to implement in hardware. And if we find a way to piggyback on something else that can do the page aligning that is also used for other mainstream use cases, that's probably a big win for NFS, because no one's going to do something just for NFS. So instead of framing the discussion of how we can secure RDMA, is how do we get a secure transport that does proper page or proper payload alignment? And that could be secure RDMA because that has other use cases. But I think the problem statement actually goes one step back.
Wait, Tom, you have a comment?
Just going to comment on the Quick topic to remind people that we talked about an iWarp layering on Quick a couple of years ago. We were encouraged to table it because Quick wasn't yet standardized, and it likely would require some sort of Quick extension to make proper use of the mapping. And so we deferred it. And I would love to pick that up again. I think there's a lot of good points about layering iWarp on Quick. I'll also agree with Christoph that, hardware implementation or something that can be implemented out of software is very advantageous. And finally, I'll mention that I have a proposal that, once again, we were encouraged to table for the time being, that would add encryption to RDMA direct transfers without, by the way, a protocol change. That would not necessarily encrypt the entire RDMA payload. It would only encrypt the directly placed payload. So requirements, thinking through our requirements, I think is really critical before we explore any of these paths. It's great to list them, but we've been here before and we stopped going down that road. So let's just back up and think about requirements and see where it points us. That's all.
Quick question, Tom. Did we ever have a requirements document regarding the data only encryption without protocol change?
No.
Okay.
No, like I say, we were encouraged to table it because everybody's head was exploding. I'd love to pick
Lars
it up.
Eggert again. Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
The chair.
I'm getting noise in the background. I'm sorry, I got to mute.
Okay. The chair recognizes Lars Eggert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Tom and Christoph made good points, right? So I think thinking about what's needed is a good approach. And I think Christoph, I think what you said is while we might have hardware offload for TLS, we don't have hardware offload for Quick, and that is certainly true at the moment, right? So there's some, I can't quite recall if they've presented this as an either or in terms of TLS or Quick. I don't really think it's an either or. I think there's certainly deployments where performance matters now, where TLS has definite performance benefits because you can actually do a TLS offload on a NIC while you cannot do this with Quick right now. Quick offload is on the roadmap, but it's going to take a little bit more time because it's not so easy, let's say, and a bunch of vendors have found that they can't do it with the current ASICs. But it's going to come, and it has the potential to get you some better performance and future features down the road. But I think it might be worthwhile to do TLS and Quick and maybe prioritize TLS because you can ship this pretty much immediately. While with Quick, you really got to need to wait for the hardware offload if you want to run it at high performance. I'll point out that the Microsoft SMB use of Quick is actually for wide area use and not so much for high performance. And they actually just use one Quick stream that they treat as a TCP connection. So they don't use any multiple messages as far as I know, because their use case is simply getting SMB run over the WAN.
Okay.
The point I was making is that we really need to talk to the hardware vendors what works for them, and that could be TLS now, Quick in the future. And the other thing I think we should consider is if we're able to design the protocol so it doesn't need actually iWarp specific hardware offloads, but we can piggyback on other things. And I don't know what, because the whole idea of it like generic page splitting, as we call it, like alignment of the payload, this has actually been something that's been on the wish list of some of the big guys, including like the cloud vendors. And we haven't gotten there yet. We had some more discussions in the eBPF context because eBPF might actually be useful for that. But even then, network protocols tend to be fairly stateful, and it's actually hard to collect all that state to do the proper offload. So either we need to figure out that RDMA is actually important enough that enough hardware implements just whatever we do, or we need to figure out if there is a way to design the protocol with little enough state that something like an eBPF or similar based header splitting engine would actually solve all the problems, which would also make other users that are looking for the page splitting very happy, which might turn out it's something that would move out of this working group and into other working groups. But
okay. We have two people in the queue, Tom again, and then Q Marcel. Tom?
Yeah, so two comments. IWARP over TLS over TCP is potentially easy to deploy, but does require pretty substantial changes in the NIC. So it might be a little bit problematic. It's been considered before, and my belief is the NIC vendors were not very enamored of it. It required a number of things that were hard to implement with the same security model that the IPsec original model would provide. Second, SMB's use of Quick is very, very simplistic. It's a really lousy example. I agree with Lars. Let's consider it, but it's primarily for penetrating firewalls, getting to the cloud, if you will, and it is not at all for performance. I think it could have been done better, but it's a first step only. I guess that's all. I was just following up on those two comments.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Marcel. I think Quick for NFS would have its uses because of the WAN element anyway, so I think it is worthwhile to standardize it regardless. And if someone can then make Quick work in hardware, that would be amazing, and I'm sure would help a load of other working groups, given how many protocols are beginning to run over Quick these days. Given we can make TLS hardware offload work, I'm sure someone will be able to figure out Quick hardware offload. I'm willing to be proven wrong on that point. But I don't think it's worthwhile saying, no, we don't need to bother caring about Quick because no one's managed to make a hardware offload yet.
Okay. All right. Dave, continue.
Okay, sure. Okay. Anyway, this is one way of doing this, assuming we go this direction, although I think we should also consider the other things that people have mentioned, would be a mapping document, sort of like the way the NV map document. Another thing is a simple extension of RFC 504 to include Quick on the same level as TCP and SCTP, plus a new document, like currently we have documents 5043, 5044, one for TCP, one for SCTP, and probably need a revision of 5042 as well. But it's a significant amount of work, but it's not all that much. And it looks like RFC 7306 can be left alone. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Now, people have mentioned the need for hardware implementation, and I don't think I'm going to do that. I don't think we're going to do that. And it's one thing to wait until vendors. Another thing is, I think it would be helpful to just do a software-only implementation, and then you have something that you can speak to vendors about rather than just sort of wave your hands. So anyway, I think I'm hoping to do some sort of implementation work given what's available. All right. So I think people have mentioned the possibility that we'll need something else from Quick that's not there now. And to do that, you really have to do some testing before. You have need implementation. We don't want to get in this situation where I know Tom said we were encouraged to table this. I don't know, but it's a new day now. It's years later. Quick is standardized. Maybe it's not what we need. Let's just see if it is. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, and then I'll be finished with this. So I would start. We have an open source IWARP implementation. It's BSD license. I would take that. Now there probably is somewhere, I hope, software Quick implementation. If that exists, I would use that, and if it has the right licensing. Anyway, I think beyond the document issue, I think we need to put equal stress on getting some implementation work done to see if this is really workable. Okay, that's the end of the talk.
Yeah, on the last second, on the implementation bit, right? There's 20-ish open source quick implementations at the moment. So MS Quick from Microsoft, I think is BSD licensed if I remember correctly, and it has a nice feature that it can be compiled both into a library for applications, and it's actually also used in the Windows kernel, so it has the right abstraction, so you can run it in the kernel. And I think
Okay, that'd be good.
There was even a Linux vendor who was doing a POC of doing Quick in the Linux kernel. I don't think it's ever public or released, but somebody did that. There's others, right? There's a Rust implementation that has C bindings, that's BSD licensed as far as. So there's a whole bunch that would be available, and there's
Okay,
sort of. So Christoph Googled it and he found something. So I think the BSD license is not an objection, and there's also stacks that are sort of super actively maintained because everybody's shipping this now. So I think this is not a limitation, but the other things we discussed earlier still need to be worked through.
Okay.
Tom, you have a question, comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think this greatly underestimates and understates the work required to do this right. We don't want to layer IWARP on Quick like it's layered on TCP. We don't want MPA over Quick, right? MPA, the framing protocol, is there purely for TCP. So if we take it out, now we have a new negotiation problem. It ripples up the protocol rapidly. There's a whole lot of work to be done. Personally, I think that IWARP could be sort of re-architected to do it. The protocol would remain very similar at the upper layer, but the transport interaction would become much more rototilled, as we used to call it. It would have more intimate knowledge of the transport features and take advantage of. Anyway,
I think that's right.
It's much more work than you described. It's not just an extension to the existing documents. Those documents are written to very specific TCP requirements. We're going to have to do a lot more than extend them.
Well, we'll just see. I'll get the editor out and see what it looks like. A few months from now.
But so don't forget, there are other RDMA protocols in the world. And so, I'm not sure that an IWARP only approach is the proper one from the worldwide perspective. We may want to consider how RDMA itself could leverage security protocols or security capabilities. And think about that as well.
Okay, sure.
There's not much left of the IWARP manufacturer market, by the way.
All right. Let's see. I think Tom's the next person. So let's see his slide.
Well, he doesn't have slides, and we kind of already covered it. He's going to upload updates.
Okay, fine.
That makes you being up again.
I'm up again. Okay, fine. All right. Well, this is a slightly modified from the set of slides that I presented at the interim that only a few people attended. All the chairs were there anyway, and David Black, I guess. In any case, these are modified based on changes I've made and some suggestions that were made at the time. But it's very close. Anyway, let's move on to the next slide. All right. This overview is, motivations, why we're doing this, why we needed this document. It's been like a long time since RFC 5661 was published, and there are a lot of things, as we'll see, that aren't right in it and need to be fixed. So now we're going to discuss what's in the 01 draft, which is the latest draft that's out there. Things that I mentioned that need to be done, that in some of the appendices of 01 are mentioned them, but not yet done, and anything else people want to raise, and what the process might be going forward, which I think may be modified based on what Chris will have to say later. Anyway, let's move on to the next slide. Now, these are the motivations we had when we started to do the BIS document. First of all, we need to separate out areas that were common to all minor versions. As 5661 was written, it would say, this is an entirely separate protocol, blah, 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 blah. And as things worked out, for a number of things, that wasn't the right thing. I'll talk about those later. Also, we had an enormous number of errata reports that we had to address. Also, because over time, we had a number of changes to that. First of all, we did 8881. Then there were other documents modifying 5660 that update. For example, 8434. So I think we want a full suite of documents, the document V4.1. And the primary one is unsatisfactory treatment of security in the existing specification. There's no threat analysis in either RFC 7530 or in 5661 or 8881. And somehow we got away with that, and I don't think we can get away with that any longer. And the second thing I want to draw attention to is the discussion of auth-sys presents it as optional. I think Brian raised a question of new flavor. We don't need new flavors, but we do need to coherently describe the flavors they have. And in the case of auth-sys, it's described as an optional means of authentication, but it's not optional in the RFC 2119 sense, because it's not that the implementer has a free choice. He has a choice, but in choosing to use his auth-sys, he compromised security, and you cannot use the word optional in that case. And as it says, it describes an optional means of authentication, but doesn't have any authentication. And so that's part of my motivation in trying to address that. All right, let's move on to the next slide. All right, now this was done, and I think this touches an area we've got internationalization. There was a reviewer assigned. It's 2 weeks late. I think I understand now from Chris that there's going to be a meeting, and we don't know what the outcome of that is, but we'll see what we can get out of, if we can have any meaningful help from that review. Anyway, we need to go through that process. Now, with regard to security, I think we need to discuss working group adoption of some document. I think it should be the one that I originally asked to be adopted like 6 or 8 months ago, whatever it was. And also, as I think Chris has been very strong on this point, that we need to arrange to get help from the security directorate. So I think once I know what the sequencing is, but first of all, we need to get going with that document. Right now, I had a individual draft, and somehow in the process of doing the adoption call, it was lost and expired, and I think we'll have to get back to ground zero. Anyway, let's move on to the next slide. All right, there is, I think somehow I originally asked that this be adopted, but somehow that was lost. Anyway, there will be need for it's a very small set of changes, but there will be need for an RFC 5662 BIS as well as 5661 BIS. It's just like about half a dozen changes. We need as part of this transformation to be clear about 8178 and the and that is already in the draft 01. And I think if you read that, you'll see that where that's done. And I think Tom did this document, this RFC 8434. I think we need to incorporate what it says into RFC 5661 BIS. I think that can be done by simply being more careful in some of the statements in chapters 12 and 13 of the existing document. And I don't think that will get done by 02, but once it's done, I would like to have Tom review that and make sure that it incorporates what he was trying to did communicate in RFC 8434. Let's move on. Next slide. Okay. Now there's the second round of, in addition to the initial motivations, we've come up with quality issues that we found, that I found, or maybe other people have found, as we worked with the existing documents. One was, and it's dealt with a lot of, if you want details, in Appendix C1 of the current draft. A lot of use of RFC 2119 terms were not in accord with the deduction in RFC 2119. There's also a lot of, in 01, going from 0 to 1, I found a lot of confused terminology to clean up, in which the same word was used in different meanings in different sections, or there were multiple, for example, in the case of verifier, there's like 5 different kinds of verifier, and one, and in the definitions section, one of those is picked out as the meaning of the word verified. That had needed to be changed. There were also things that I think were just wrong. First of all, we've had some problems with director access, and then people have proposed various extensions, but I think the simplest thing is we've already done this for directory delegation, and I think it's never been implemented. And part of the reason it's never been implemented, it's not made sufficiently clear in the current spec about what it can do, what it can't do, and it's actually more helpful than many people think. And so that needs to be clarified. The other things is the discussion of the persistent reply cache. And if you read those carefully, you have to come to the conclusion that this is impossible to implement. So those need to be restated, so we have something that A is useful and B is implementable, and then maybe we'll have people try to implement that. But right now, what's in there is presented as an optional feature, so it's perfectly okay if you don't implement it. But there's no point in describing something that is just unimplementable. And I think with a little more care in rewriting, it'll make clear what you need to do with some of the difficult things without anything that's impossible. All right. Also, the discussion of memory mapped I/O. I think people will see that it's in the 01. If you compare it and look at it, it says some things that just don't make sense and had to be rewritten. Anyway, let's move on to the next slide. All right. Now, I think it's important as we move forward that whether we have the interim meetings that Chris wants or not, or do this on the list, whatever we do, people have to read the document and find out what's in it and tell me whether they agree or disagree or would like changes. So I think it's important. I'll go over this one more time. How to find out what is in it. And part of that is difficult because I've had to reorganize some things. So you can't just do a straight diff of RFC 881 and 01. So I think it makes sense to do two levels of this. First of all, is you have to compare RFC 881 to the -00. And that you'll find some changes, but there are a lot of changes that are not real changes. And anyway, however, the changes going from -0 to -1, I think you'll see everything that shows up as diff is real, and all of those I hope are explained in Appendix B51. So. So all the other thing it's important to look at the appendices, which I think do at least a fair job of explaining what has changed and why, and what needs to be changed and why. All right. All right. The first big difference is there's an organizational change. There needs to be Section 1 introducing this update and what's changed and why. Now, a lot of the more detailed things are in one of the appendices, but Section 1 is the introduction of why this is different. And the other thing we started to do is address errata reports, which was a big thing. And I hope it's now almost done. The other thing that was done in 01 is the use of the term capital recommended, despite the fact this is not in accord with RFC 2119. And right now in 01, I used the word recommended, but then I later, in response to comments David Black made, and also just thinking about it, maybe recommended is the wrong word. There are some attributes that really should be recommended, but the majority of them are just optional. And you'll see that when the 02 comes out. Now the 02 is probably not going to come out till the end of August. Anyway, it's important to look at the three appendices, A, B, and C: nature of changes, status of changes, and further the issues requiring discussion. In some cases, I said, well, this needs to be discussed, and I need to write new text. But given times, in some cases, I've said, here's the new text, and we need to discuss it further to make sure we have consensus on that. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, one of the big things that I did was redescription of retry and exactly one semantics. In one case, it says you must wait for the response, but we know that many clients can't wait. This is a must. A must is supposed to be a fundamental requirement of the specification. And if you don't follow the must, it's actually the must is wrong. It really means, if you try to look at how it's used, it really means it'd be really nice if things worked this way. And it would be really nice, but that's not the meaning of must. And a lot of things about retries, it says you must not resend this request without disconnection. There's a lot of explanation of why it's a bad idea, and I understand people feel risk, but that doesn't merit capital must not. So as a result of this, it turns out that we don't have exactly one semantics. What we have is at most one semantics, because you cannot stop, you should not be able to stop a guy from being able to control C request. And so therefore you can never ensure that that thing is actually done. You have to be able to stop it. And that's why you can't have exactly once. It's either the semantics is once or zero times or once. The requirement is you never execute it twice, particularly if it's idempotent. Then I mentioned this before, but the section of memory mapping and locking. All right. I think I had to cut that into about half the text of that had to be was just plain wrong and had to be gotten rid of. And so that's another thing you'll see in going from 00 to 01. I hope if people are having issues with that, let me know. But I think that's clear that a lot of what's in there in the 5661 and 881 is just plain wrong. All right, let's go on, move on. All right, some terminology clarifications. Client owner. In some places, they use the term client owner to include the verifier, and some places it doesn't. So I split up. Client owner includes the verifier, and if you want to just talk to the string and not the verifier, it's called a client owner ID. And there are about 5 different uses of the word verifier. Also, another thing I found is the PNFS terminology. I think we often have two different sets of terminology. One we use with files, and another we use with blocks. And I think you need some more generic technology. So instead of having data server in one place and storage device in another and being confused, you need a generic term, which used in chapter 12. And similarly with storage protocol, data protocol. And the other issue was the issue of control protocol. Now in the document, it says control protocol and says, well, gee, even if you don't have a control protocol, you have to do something to do these things. So that's a control protocol, which is fine. But turns out that at least in the loose coupling mode, some of the documents say we don't have a control protocol. So I think we have to clarify whether we have a control protocol or a separate control protocol. And in the case of the flexible files layout, we don't have a separate control protocol. But in the sense that this is used in RFC 5661, we do have something to accomplish that function. All right, let's move on.
Christoph Helwig,
Yes.
is that the mic?
Yeah, so let's go back to the previous slide. So I really don't think adding yet another term or change is really helping at this stage of the protocol's lifetime, right? I mean, we finally got everyone who cares to barely understand the PNFS terminology. Let's not change it right now.
Okay. Well,
Tom Haynes, is that the mic?
I'm also confused. Doesn't 8434 talk about this stuff and address it? So we had a previous document that defined these terminologies.
I'll take another look at that. All right, should we go on?
Yeah.
Now, well, given that security is done in a separate document, the question of how you deal with security for PNFS. And so some of it, particularly the case where the data protocol is uses the RPC, should be covered by the security document, which we need to get going. On the other hand, we have a number of things in other cases, like for example, objects, blocks, where security is very different and cannot be done that well because the main reason is you don't know what users. When you have a block protocol, you don't have to distinguish different principles, just distinguish different nodes. I think that's it. I don't know much about block protocols, but I think that's the case. And so we have a thread. We have the beginnings of a thread analysis in the security document, which somehow we need to get going on, and we'll also need a thread analysis for PNFS. In the case of data protocols using RFC, using RPC, that can be done. That can be done in the main security document, but we have to make clear. I think the basic thing is that you have to trust the clients. And if you don't, I don't see how you're going to get this to work. Anyway, let's move on. All right, I'm going to discuss. I'm working on draft 02, and I want some things to have to be done. Or there are a few. I think there's a list of 4 remaining errata reports, and I think that needs to be done by draft 02 is out. By the time draft 02 is out, I need to revisit recommended actions, although not all are equally recommended. So the question of how, the question is, well, what do you do? What would you do with a server that does not support, for example, owner, group, and mode? There's really no way to do it. And you can't recommend that anyone, I think you need to recommend that these are not just optional. If someone doesn't provide these, he does not have any real basis for security. And so I think that had to be done. So some of these have to be moved back to this recommended state. And also the description of named attributes is mentioned in the appendix. Probably not in the 01 appendix, but it has made more clear that named attributes are an optional feature. Although the way they're described, if you read RFC 5661 as it is, that's not so clear to the reader. All right, let's move on.
Chris has a comment.
Chris Nacio as a individual, not as chair. So Dave, in the interim, David Black made the recommendation that some of the recommended in the draft that you're going from RFC whatever 2919 language to like kind of lowercase recommended. Some of those need to be required in order to maintain what a baseline of interoperability is. Are you?
Well, that's my memory. I think he said that they should be should, and that's what I've done that's what I've done. I think required is a possibility, but I think right now I think my intention is they said they should, and this is in contract to all the rest of them, which are really optional. You could use the word recommended, capital, but given the history I don't think that would be just confusing people, because recommended in RFC 5661 and in RFC 7530, the word is used, but it's not real. It's just, these are really optional, and we treat them as optional in terms of the extension model, and they really are optional.
So Lysager, Dave, that's not correct in the sense of RFC 2119. Recommended means should, and should means must, unless you have a very good reason not to must. Optional is another thing, which means optional.
That's what I'm trying to be in line with that, but in the past it hasn't been. Should basically mean, I think this has if you look over RFC 5061, a lot of cases where should means, gee, I think this would be really nice. So we can't have that anymore.
That's what optional means. Should really means you must do this unless you have a good reason why you violate the must, and the RFC should or like ideally say
exactly so. But in a lot of cases, the good reason is, well, I don't want to.
No, that's not a good reason.
I know. I don't think so.
It needs to be a technical reason.
That's why we need to change this.
I'm fully willing to believe that maybe in 5661 we weren't quite so formal with that word, although we should have been, given that it's been 3,000 RFCs since 2119 was published. But I agree that it should be cleaned up, and you guys need to define
one of the problems.
What do you mean?
Have been when you use lowercase should. There has been a group of people in the ISG who says, well, do you really mean should? And
lowercase is something.
No.
Lowercase is something different, but you have an uppercase recommended here, which is identical to an uppercase should.
Exactly.
Right? So the uppercase terms are the ones that have precise definitions. The lowercase stuff mean whatever you want them to mean by English language, right?
Exactly.
I've seen divorce filings on less basis than this argument we're making.
I'm sure you have.
and I would just like to really reemphasize and clarify David Black's point, which is he wants required statements, uppercase required, to define a minimum interoperable set of clients to server. That if you don't have required to get to the point of at least basic interop, then you don't really have a useful standard.
Okay, I'll do. Is he here?
He is not. That's why I am reading the notes from the interop that I took down and the statement he said, and I will actually read my note if you would like.
I know.
Which is
not that I don't trust you, but I heard something different. So I'll just contact him.
Point.
All right. No more divorce filings, but let's move on. So
I have to jump in. No. So look. Jesus, I apologize. So Brian Plowski, speaking as an old individual, so clarifying, it's a big document, and there's a lot of words, and that we missed some of the nuances of what we meant to say in relation to the specific meanings the IETF ascribes to canonical English words, is likely. So is there any objections to simple cleanup of language to basically IETF normalizes stuff? I'm asking this question because this does not require protocol changes. This is not going to change anybody's implementations, but if somebody reads this, long after we're gone, which is getting closer and closer, that it would be IETF normal. It is, to me, we're not arguing about the protocol at this point. Neither are we arguing about what the implementations are doing. We're just simply trying to get the IETF normal word usage in there. Any objection to that, by the way? I'm just curious.
Lars, no objection, right? But I think sort of what David.
There you go.
No. So I fully agree that the current implementations are interoperable, right? Otherwise, there wouldn't be a market. But I think the point David tried to make is, right, if the wording is ambiguous, somebody new might start an implementation and arrive at a feature set following, the requirements language based on their reading of the current RFC, which actually doesn't interoperate because, for example, they understood something to be a should, which nobody else thought so, or vice versa. So the point is that you need to have a core that is really actually required, and that establishes interoperability, and the shoulds and the optionals, right, or the recommended and the optionals would then be extensions that are sort of clearly understood as such and negotiated in some way, or NFS does this, right? I think that I wasn't there when David made the point, but that's sort of my gist of what he means.
Right. Okay, fair. All right. We done with that topic?
Sorry. One more.
Q myself. I think, yes, we should update. Yes. Update the wording to be consistent with what everyone else expects the wording to be, because it's all well and good saying everyone knows what this actually means until someone comes along and doesn't know what this actually means. And we can, of course, say different things for what the server and client must, should, and are recommended to do to ensure that what is written down, if someone does all the musts, will have a workable implementation, or semi-workable.
Right. Got it. Thanks.
Okay. So I left here some things that are going to be done in O2 and beyond. I think O2 will not be ready for working. I don't know. I can't predict when, but I know it will not be O2. So some things that are mentioned in C2. The cleanup of directed delegation. Now that might be perceived by some people as changing the protocol, but it's not intentional. I think there are cases where someone might say that this is not workable because everything in a directed can change, but although it's not intended that, I think you have to be clear on what you can assume doesn't change, given that you have a directed delegation that is not recalled. Anyway, also persistence. I think there I have to change the description of persistent reply cache so it's implemented, because the intention was that it be implemented, and although people may have different opinions about this, about what should be implemented, we cannot describe something that's not implemented. And also lock persistence. In one section, it gives it clearly indicates that it indicates that you cannot have lock persist across a server root. In another case, it seems natural, and I think it's implied that it does, so we'll have to resolve that. And I think someone mentioned attribute descriptions. They need to be, some of them, they need to reorganize them along category lines, but they also need to be clearer. For example, it says, well, you have to have an accurate value for the modified time. Well, that's helpful, but that thing has nanosecond. It has to be more clearly defined what accurate means. For example, modified time needs to be accurate in one way, but access time I've seen many implementations that are kind of approximate, and I don't think that's a problem, but the spec needs to be clear about these things. And right now it just sort of hand waves. It doesn't deal with those difficult questions. Other things on the list are threat analysis, which we don't have. That probably will be for PNFS, and that will go along with the threat analysis of core NFS, which is part of the security document. There are a few errata, and maybe there's some other things that need doing. I think maybe we don't have too much time, but in any case, if you know those should be on. I hope those would be raised on the list. Okay, next slide.
So,
Sorry, Chris.
yeah, Chris Nacio as chair. Do we know of any implementations that actually do the persistent reply cache?
Not now, no, but I have some people who are thinking about it.
Okay.
And the question is, you do implement, how do you communicate to the clients that's the case? So I think that's what the thing we need to have.
Well, so I guess
or clear statements that you can't do it. I don't know. Which I wouldn't
as a
prefer,
chair,
but-
I'm thinking two things here, which is, as far as I know, vendor-wise, you only build servers, not clients. So you would also need someone who does clients. Two,
Well, we do
you
have
would
some people
want-
who do clients.
Oh, okay. And then the second
They
part
were,
there is
they were, they work on Linux, but yes, we do have such people, and they're
Okay.
pretty good.
and then the second part is how would I interrupt that?
So,
I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, so unless I'm mistaken, this is a standards track document, and you will strand it in the process as not being able to progress standards wise unless you can do an interop, which requires 3 different implementations.
So, well, there's only one actual operating system in the world today. So, can I ask a different question?
Sure.
Has anybody implemented this code yet? And what problem have they seen? Or have you decided not to implement the persistent reply cache?
Well, okay. This certainly I think many people have implemented persistence, but in that case, you just basically you have a grace period, but you don't really need one, and you don't have to delay things, given that you know what locks are there. The other thing is that you might want to tell the client that he doesn't need to worry about this at all, and they can just proceed immediately upon connection. So since that not in the, I think the details need to be probably discussed later, either in an interim meeting or at IETF 118.
Okay, Tom's at the microphone.
Yeah,
Tom.
I think we did this at Sun, but we never published it. We had a persistent reply cache, and they were packing the state and restarting the system right away and no grace period. But I mean, like I said, it never saw the light of day. I don't know of anyone else who does it.
Sounds like an AFS feature.
No.
Well,
No,
certainly as it's become cheaper to have fast, I think we'll see more of this.
okay.
Thanks for that. All right. Okay. So, although I don't think I have time to discuss these, but I think these are things to raise on the list. problems with these, with all the things I've mentioned or haven't mentioned that are done. I'd like to hear with those addressed on the list. So leave that up for a few minutes and say, if you know something that needs to be addressed, I don't think we have time for people to go to the microphone one after the other, but I do think we should raise these on the mailing list. All right. I think I've mentioned this before. I think yeah, okay. And as far as persistent sessions, there's a requirement for atomicity, and you can read that as say the whole compound and the storing of the state has to be done atomically, which would basically make need to reword that to make clear what needs to be atomic, not everything. And also the discussion of, in particular in the case of compounds that have multiple non-idempotent operations. And the assumption there is that it has to be possible to execute a compound across a rebooting server, and which I don't know how one would do that. And I think that has to be clear. There has to be some way for terminating a compound at a server reboot. So that's the other thing that needs to be done then. And also clarifying the lock. We discussed that, and I'll have a more specific proposal about that later. And I think that's it for that slide. Well, okay. Have I missed anything? Yes, I have, but I don't know what it is. So I'll have to rely on you. All right. All right, let's move on. And I think that's it. All right. So this gets in, I think Chris may have his own version of this, but my expectation as an author is that we have two channels of discussion. One is meetings, such as this one. Okay. And probably interim meetings, but I don't know. I think the issue that I'll leave to Chris is, how do we get people to attend these meetings? Or make it easy for them to attend these meetings. How do we schedule them? And I would do this while conforming to whatever the IETF notice requirements are. I think at times, Chris has mentioned the possible weekly meetings. I don't know if that's realistic. I'll leave it him to decide. I think we need at least monthly meetings. We cannot wait 4 months to the next IETF. Anyway, I think a lot of issues are going to be resolved, even if we succeed in holding interim meetings, is the mailing list, because I think if something's wrong, if you think have an alternate proposal, it's best to be able to say what the exact words you refer to. And no matter how good the note takers are, they're never going to exactly match that. All right, so there will be future drafts. I think I'll have at least 02 and 03. Maybe, I don't know how many, at least that many before working group last call. But anyway, I think working group's last call is, but I think we've made a lot of progress, and at least I can start thinking about it. All right, let's move. That's it. That's it for me. I think I'll turn it over to Chris, who has some things to say. I hope he has some things to say.
Yeah, I guess we all do at this point. Okay. I know that we had some earlier comments about. I don't think I have anything in there that has a discussion slide. No. All right. I think this is the conversation. I think there's two conversations related to this about doing interims and what's the appetite for doing this level of work. And I don't think that those are necessarily divorced topics, no matter how much we might want to talk about divorce here. So you guys tell me. I mean, so Dave's been doing the kind of primary authoring here. So Dave doesn't want weekly meetings. Probably doesn't make sense to at least do weekly meetings. But it doesn't also make sense to do interim meetings at all if people don't attend them and want to engage on this work. And I know that those aren't exactly a perfect Venn overlap, but
Well, one thing, I didn't get the invite for the last interim, by the way, so I don't know. I'm on the list, NFSV4, but I didn't get it. So maybe it's a mishap, or maybe the list is not updated. So how do I get that?
We did something wrong on the meeting scheduling. Some people got it through the list, but it wasn't going through the IETF channels. We will not repeat that mistake.
yeah.
Okay,
So I messed it
so-
up. It was on the NFS list. It wasn't on the interim list for the IETF. That won't happen again.
Okay, just comment, because I was interested, but I didn't see the invite. So I said, okay, probably they. And by the way, the last meeting was not 3 months ago. The IETF, 2 IETFs before, 6 months ago, when we have the last normal meeting. So it was supposed to be several in interims, if so.
All right, so thank you. Tom, you're at the microphone.
So very mechanically, if I have a calendar invite, it's much easier for me to remember and schedule the meeting. I'm just saying that would help me a whole lot.
So if I'm not mistaken, and I will promise to do a better job in the future, irrespective of what how the last one went. I do believe there was an ICS attached to the mailing list invite. I will do a better job. I will get calendar invites out, etc. So independent of that, but
that would make it much more easy for me to.
Is an ICS attachment to like an email sufficient?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, I get it, but my calendar is configured such that it won't pull it out from a mailing list, right? So on a mailing list, I have to say add, versus if you send me an email directly to me with an invite, it'll show up on my calendar.
I'm in the same boat. I would have attended, but there was nothing on my calendar. The reminder I received literally 7 minutes before the meeting, but I wasn't reading my email 7 minutes before the meeting, so I got it much too late to join. But I would have joined. I think it's wrong to assume that nobody would participate. We just need to get all the mechanics done.
Yeah.
That's what the chairs were looking to hear.
Yeah, and Kent, I have a question for Chris and the group. Frequency of meeting. I think Dave proposed 1 a month. Might I split the difference between 1 hour and 2 hours and say 90-minute meetings for the discussion, and we could always finish early? I just an hour. I'm worried that an hour is not going to allow us to cover the material. Is anybody against? Do I have to take a vote? Do I have to?
Yeah, but like, let's not get there yet.
Okay. Okay.
Sure.
But frequency?
Well, it's something should come up for us to vote on, right?
Well, no, I would like to have some conversation. I would like to do some informal feedback, and then I'll do some polls. But I don't want to do 30 polls. if folks can just communicate.
All right, informally,
That
I
large
think
of a group. There's not
that's sensible.
150 people in here.
Also,
I think, go ahead.
I think 90 minutes, right? Because there will be other things that come up that not in traditional things, and we'll have to have some time for those too.
Lars Egger, as somebody who's not going to attend these interims, I think this is a great plan. No, but so I mean, I think finding a cadence that works for you seems fine, and discuss what this is, and basically having a defined booked slot length is also fine, and you can always basically tweak that length as you make your agenda and announce it. In accordance to the rules we have around interim meetings, right? But I think sort of getting it on people's calendars seems like a good step, especially if you want to have it like at a pretty regular pace.
I would just like to say in my defense, in following the checklist on doing it, there's a whole bunch of don't do this step if you've done it this way, do this step if you haven't done it this way. And I did meet Echo on the idea that actually it did some of the things for me that it does not do, to in my defense.
So I agree that 90 minutes to 2 hours is probably about right. Part of the reason is that there's always a technical issue, especially if we're going to use Meet Echo, God help us. That'll delay the start of the productive part of the meeting. But yeah, I mean, it takes that long to clear your throat and start the discussion. So the longer meeting is probably a good plan, but not too long.
There's no requirement to use Meet Echo, right? Use whatever works for you. It just needs to be publicly accessible.
I used Meet Echo to solve some of my scheduling problems in the IETF announcement, which didn't obviously work. And I heard more than enough feedback from the 4 participants who were on the interim that we should use something else. And I have an enterprise Zoom, so they'll most likely be Zooms, and they will be openly accessible.
Yeah, the audio problems, just like today, this is not even amusing anymore. Seriously.
So, I mean, if you don't like Zoom as well, I mean, if there's as much angst about Zoom, there's IETF accounts for WebEx as well. We could use that.
No, not WebEx. No.
So I'm hearing a lot of support for using the university Zoom account.
Yes, Zoom.
Do it.
Okay, I did 2 p.m. Eastern, 1500 for those who like to think in that there are more than 12 hours in a day. That's crazy talk. I'm an American. There's not. Anyway, sorry. So, I mean, time-wise, I took that number from, and that was on a Tuesday. I took that from previous poll results. I don't know if that's a great time. I'm inclined to try that time again and adjust if necessary. But if I do a repeating entry into the IETF system, right now I'm just being sensitive to my own workload of how often am I going to go in and mess with data tracker, etc. So if people have that's an awful time I'd like to throw out, let's have that conversation. I will do some polls at the end in this in this session here. But if people have vehement objections to that time, or that time is just as awful as any other time on your calendar, then so be it.
So this is Richard Jeffenegger. It's not on the agenda, and I'm not 100% sure if it has reached everybody on the mailing list. A couple of months ago, I've made the observation, or announced the observation, that with clients now becoming more and more prevalent with the use of NConnect, the architectural assumption that all these different sessions that a client has to a server have the same characteristics doesn't always hold. Meaning you can end up with the slowest path holding up the overall performance characteristics of an NFS session. And my question being is, would this here the right forum to document some kind of best practice, how an NFS client implementation would go around distributing the I/O load to different paths, and if there is energy to come up with a document around this. Thanks.
From a chair point of view, I think this is the right forum. Energy is a different question.
Not enough general purpose client implementers.
I observed that Lars has fled the room.
Okay. You taking us home?
Yeah, I'm going to do a poll for the time.
Okay.
If you have more, go ahead.
I mean, at the end of the day, this is a client-only implementer's decision, quite frankly. It's just a question if somebody wants to go ahead and document some known best ways how to do it, or we just leave it at that. And most implementers, I believe, are currently using round robin or some variant of round robin, which realistically speaking, under most circumstances, is good enough.
Am I beating you to a question?
There is a poll.
So didn't you say 2 p.m. earlier and now it's 3 p.m.?
Oh, he said 2 p.m. and then said 1500. They don't match.
That's the American way of.
That is actually the. And you know what? It was. What it was.
13 hours.
It was. It was 3 p.m. wasn't it?
Yes, shortly out. It's 3 nothing.
That's whatever.
This always just makes me glad that US units are actually minutes and hours for time. Because they come up with their own thing.
No, French did not.
Oh, yeah, the revolution.
Everybody.
That's probably acceptable. It means I'm not on a time wall on my time zone. So what is the expected answer for that?
So I mean, the short version of that is, it's possible we could move it. If
The things I probably don't matter.
go to the mic, please. I mean, like we could potentially move it back an hour or two to make it a little easier for.
So as someone on Central European time who is not a late night worker, 9 to 11 p.m. my time, doesn't work too well. But then again, I'm probably not the most important attendee. So
I mean, the balancing act is obviously the Californians and the Central European. We don't tend to have a lot of Asian participation.
that wouldn't make it any
so-
easier. No. But yeah, so it doesn't work perfectly well for me. I don't think that's actually a major issue. I would probably try to chime in for the first hour or so if it works out otherwise. But
So I assume for each interim there'll be an agenda beforehand.
Yeah, although depending on if there will be an agenda posted for each interim, however, more likely than not, a lot of that will potentially be recycled as we focus on progressing a handful of documents. But we should get more detailed than that. We'll see how well we do.
I guess that's my way of saying we could get your comments to take in before the meeting. Okay. What else do you need?
We can move back to say 14 or something like that. I don't know what conflicts. That's not a bad West Coast time either. 1400 or something like that.
Every other Tuesday, I have a meeting at that time. But so if we manage to avoid that, if we do,
If we cycle it off of those.
yeah, then I'm perfect. Okay.
14.
All right, we're doing another poll.
We're doing another poll.
Another poll.
I'm using every last minute of your guys' time.
Works for me too.
So I did this. All right.
Look at that. Look at that. I've never met a more agreeable set of people in my life. Perfect.
Is this supposed to be the first Tuesday of the month? It's monthly, so just saying
TBD.
Tuesdays.
Well,
TBD.
well, if we don't want to mess up BP schedule, it's probably going to be on a 4/6 week cadence.
It's just, I'll work it out with Chris. Tuesday, that's a great time. Dial into both.
That's always great.
Okay. What else, Chris?
That's it. I think we actually covered the rest.
Good. Thanks so much. Safe travel back. I know some of you are leaving today. And thanks for participating. Thanks for the water. Thanks to the blessed
coffee
soul
delivery
that delivered a cappuccino.
Yeah, say
that
what was.
burst me awake. That was great. Okay, and I'll be getting the minutes out. Just photo your pages someday. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Take care. How do we stop this
Thanks, everybody.
thing? How do we stop it?
How do we get off the train?
Okay. All right. Someone mentioned energy. So
All right,
after
thanks,
this
Dave.
meeting, I'm going to have some caffeine. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Wow.
See you probably in truck.
Yeah, if I'll send you an email. I want to. I'm going to be in Europe, and maybe I'll stop by because I want to try that Italian place.
Well, we'll meet somewhere. It's
Yeah.
not too far away. I mean,
Well,
we've got public
maybe it could come your way.
transportation, I can get word